but I'd have to agree with Rodman. If he was black, he'd be just another good guy.
Let me tell you the real reason players feared Larry.
Isaiah Thomas once called him a basic white boy. But Magic knew the truth. Larry Bird was a psychological predator who broke the NBA's toughest enforcers and destroyed teams left-handed just to pass the time. From the 13-ton gravel disaster that secretly ended his career at his mom's house, to the 1991 phone call that proved Larry Bird was the only man who could save Magic Johnson's life. You're about to see exactly why every player in the NBA feared Larry Bird. And it starts with the one game that changed everything. You have to understand, Magic Johnson didn't just step onto the court in the early 80s thinking he was going to handle every game with ease. The guy had a routine that sounds almost insane when you hear it. He'd wake up in the morning and the first thing he did, before coffee, before breakfast, before even thinking about practice, was grab the newspaper and check Larry Bird's box score from the night before. Seriously, he was literally structuring his entire day around what Bird did. And it wasn't just curiosity. This was calculation. Almost like a soldier studying an enemy he already knew was unstoppable. Now rewind to 1979, because this obsession didn't start in the NBA. It started in the 1979 Division I men's basketball championship game. Michigan State versus Indiana State, Magic Johnson versus Larry Bird. And you might think this was just another college game, but this wasn't just any game. It pulled in over 35 million viewers and is still the most watched college game ever. That's bigger than most TV shows today. And the tension? Woo, off the charts. See, Bird was a small-town kid from French Lick, Indiana, dragging an unproven program into the national spotlight. Magic was the bright, confident face of Michigan State. So it was flash versus grit, urban versus rural, charisma versus relentless obsession. It was literally every sports cliché wrapped into one game that somehow lived up to the hype. But in the end, Magic won the game, 75-64, and on paper he outplayed Bird. He had 24 points, 7 rebounds, and 5 assists. But here's where it gets interesting. Even in that loss, Bird didn't look intimidated. He didn't complain, and according to people who were there, he looked like he was already thinking 5 steps ahead of everyone on the court. And that unnerved Magic. Bird had been unstoppable that season. He averaged nearly 29 points and 15 rebounds. He carried a team that had never mattered onto the biggest stage in college basketball. And even though Magic won, he later admitted that Bird was the one player who made him genuinely nervous before tip-off. That's not an exaggeration. This is a guy who was about to revolutionize the NBA, and the first time he faced Bird, he realized, this dude is a problem. Fast forward a few months, and both guys enter the NBA. And at this time, the league itself was struggling. Ratings were low, finals games sometimes aired on tape delay, and the NBA needed heroes. And just as if Jesus Christ were listening, what they got was a rivalry that immediately felt like something bigger than basketball. Magic stepped into a Lakers team stacked with talent. I'm talking about people like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Norm Nixon, a roster ready to compete, while Bird stepped into a Celtics team that had finished 29-53 the previous season. That's right, 29 wins and 53 losses. They were a mess. Then Bird shows up as a rookie, averages 21 points and 10 rebounds, and suddenly, Boston jumps to 61 wins, 32 more than the season before. One player changed the entire dynamic of a franchise overnight, and he did it without jumping out of the gym or dunking over multiple guys. He did it with fundamentals, smarts, and a level of confidence that was impossible to beat. And then came the Rookie of the Year race. Magic put up big numbers, 18 points, 7 rebounds, and 7 assists per game on a team that was already stacked. But Bird, he led the Celtics to wins, dominated on both ends, and took the award. Magic noticed, and from that moment, what had been a potential rivalry became something else entirely. It became psychological. This was the moment the fear started. Because players can handle someone who dunks on them or beats them with pure athleticism. What they can't handle is someone who sees their next move before they do. Someone who makes the floor feel smaller, their mistakes bigger, and their failures unavoidable. And Bird was already doing that in 1980. And if you think this is just about stats or awards, here's the crazy part. This tension didn't stay in the box scores. It spilled over into practices, into scouting reports, and into team meetings. Magic had to plan around Bird. Every move, every game, and every matchup carried a mental component. So by the time the Celtics were back in contention, Magic was living in Bird's shadow in a way no one outside the locker room could fully appreciate. But that's only the start. What Bird did next on the court, off the court, and in the heads of players around the league escalated in ways that nobody, not even Magic, could have predicted. And if you think 1979 and 1980 were impressive, wait until you hear what happened when the rest of the league started to realize that Bird was going to be trouble for them. The thing is, most guys in the NBA use trash talk as a way to pump themselves up, right? It's noise, it's "you can't guard me" or whatever. But with Bird, it was different. It was prophetic. He would tell you exactly how he was going to ruin your night, down to the specific square inch of the hardwood he'd be standing on, and then he'd just do it. And that was the trap. If a man tells you his entire game plan and you still can't stop it, you aren't just losing a game. You're losing your status as a player. But it gets weirder. The first time the whole world really saw this psychological trap work on players was the 1986 three-point contest. Now, keep in mind, this was the first year they even did the contest. Everyone was nervous. You had the best shooters in the world, Craig Hodges, Dale Ellis, guys who lived for the deep ball, all in the locker room trying to get their minds right. And so Bird walks in, doesn't even take his jacket off, looks around the room with total disgust and says, "So which one of you is coming in second?"
Boom! Bust the door open, walk around. You might do a little something. Nah, you ain't got, nah, you shot yourself out in warm up. Talking about Leon Wood. He said, nah, you shot yourself out in warm up. Who coming in second?
What makes this funnier is that he didn't say it to be funny. He said it because to him, the outcome was already certain. And then he went out there and won the whole thing while still wearing his warm-up shirt. When he let that final money ball go, he didn't even watch it hit the net. He already had his finger in the air, walking toward the trophy, the aura this man possessed. But here is where things start to get really dark. In 1985, the Celtics played the Atlanta Hawks. This is the game where Bird dropped 60. But it wasn't just the 60 points. It was the way he did it. He was calling shots like he was playing Simon Says with the other team. At one point, he even told the Hawks bench he was going to hit a shot and land in the trainer's lap. Then he lands a massive fading three, gets fouled, and literally falls directly into the lap of the Atlanta trainer. It was so ridiculous that the Hawks players on the bench, the guys who were supposed to be trying to beat him, were literally falling over each other and jumping up and down in shock. Their own coach, Mike Fratello, actually fined his players the next day for cheering for the enemy. Imagine being so dominant that you turn your opponent's bench into your own personal hype squad. But if you think that's arrogant, just know that in 1986, before a game against the Portland Trail Blazers, Bird decided he was bored with being the best right-handed player in the world. He told his teammates he was going to play the entire game with his left hand. He went out there and dropped a 47-point triple-double, scoring 20 of those points with his left hand.
Larry told all of us and the media, he said, tomorrow night's the last game of the trip, I'm going to play this one left-handed.
C-stick for Larry Bird. Bird with the left hand, and it stays.
When reporters asked him afterward why he would even do something so disrespectful, he just gave them a blank stare and said he was saving his right hand for the Lakers. Now, everyone loves to compare Bird and Michael Jordan, but their approaches were completely different. Jordan was a physical predator. He would jump over you, go through you, and use his sheer athleticism to beat you into submission. But Bird? He attacked your brain. He wanted to prove he was smarter than you. Take the Xavier McDaniel story, for example. Late in a tied game, Bird looks at Xavier, who was one of the toughest, meanest defenders in the league, and points to a spot on the floor. He says, "I'm going to stand right here, and I'm going to hit it right in your face." Xavier plays the best defense of his life, but Bird gets to the spot, hits the fadeaway, and as he's running back, he looks at him and says, "I didn't mean to leave 2 seconds on the clock."
They called a timeout, and he turned around and looked at me and said, "I'm going to score right here on you." And I said, "I know you will. I'll be ready."
But here's the shocking part nobody expected. Even the toughest, most violent team in history, the Detroit Bad Boys, started to crack. We're talking about guys like Bill Laimbeer and Rick Mahorn, who would literally tackle you into the front row. But they couldn't punch their way out of Bird's IQ. Isaiah Thomas later admitted that Bird's presence caused pure panic, and that panic led to the single most famous mistake in NBA history. It was Game 5 at the 1987 Eastern Conference Finals, and there were 5 seconds left on the clock. The Pistons were up by 1, and they had the ball. And at that point, the game was basically won. All Isaiah Thomas had to do was inbound the ball and the Pistons would have gone up 3-2 in the series. But Bird had been haunting them all night, and Isaiah was so terrified of Bird's anticipation that he rushed the pass and threw a soft, lazy loft toward Bill Laimbeer. But Bird, who had already predicted the mistake, stepped in, stole the ball, and fed Dennis Johnson for the win. But here's where it gets even messier. After getting humiliated, Rodman and Isaiah went to the media and said if Bird were black, he'd be just another guy. Typical sucker mentality.
But I'd have to agree with Rodman. If he was black, he'd be just another good guy.
But you won't believe what Magic Johnson said years later when they asked him about it. He didn't back them up.
That boy, he can play, man.
He basically told them they were delusional because Magic knew that Bird wasn't just good for a white guy. He was a tactical genius who just happened to be white. And even as the league got younger and more athletic, Bird's mental grip never slipped. In 1987, a rookie Reggie Miller tried to talk trash to Bird while he was at the free throw line. Bird just stopped, looked at him and said, "Rook, you've got to be kidding me. I'm the best shooter in the league right now, understand?" He drained the shots and walked away.
Trouble is once, he's like, "Reggie, are you freaking kidding me? Yeah. Reggie, are you kidding me? I'm the best shooter this game has ever seen. You think you're gonna be able to ice me?" As he's talking. Next one, wah.
Then you had Shawn Kemp in 1991. Kemp was a human highlight reel, a freak of nature. Bird was basically playing with a broken back at this point, but he looked at Kemp and said, "I'm the best player from Indiana, not you." He proceeded to dismantle Kemp mentally, so much so that Kemp still talks about it to date.
Larry Bird talking to you saying, "Yeah, I'm the best from Indiana. Put a 3 under my ball." That's true?
It is very true. So, I look in the mirror, I'm like, well.
This is exactly why Michael Jordan called Bird the new sheriff when he entered the league. Jordan and Magic both realized early on that Bird was just different. He didn't need to be the fastest or the strongest because he was the most inevitable. Even Kobe Bryant used to study Bird. Kobe ranked him in his top 5 of all time, not just for the skill, but for that specific mindset, that "I will tell you how I'm going to end you" attitude.
Me and Jordan, Magic, Bird, Hakeem Olajuwon, and Jerry West.
And if you watched Kobe play, you'd see that he was a mixture of Michael Jordan's athleticism and Larry Bird's IQ. But there's a darker side to this story, because while Bird was out here playing on the court, his body was secretly falling apart in a way that should have ended his career years earlier. And wait until you hear how a $20 driveway almost cost him his life. But before we talk about that, you can't fully appreciate the fear Bird instilled until you look at the resume he stacked up in an era that was essentially a televised bar fight. We're talking about 3 NBA championships, 12 All-Star nods, and a Rookie of the Year trophy he snatched away from Magic Johnson while playing for a Celtics team that was a literal dumpster fire the year before, and 3 straight MVPs in 1984, 1985, and 1986. To put this into perspective, only 2 other humans in the history of this sport have done that: Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell. That's it. That's the list. He was the undisputed king of the hill during the most physical, get-your-teeth-knocked-out era in basketball history. And you have to understand the environment in which he was doing this. We aren't talking about the positionless space and pace NBA of today, where everyone is friendly and swaps jerseys after the buzzer. This was the age of the enforcers. You had Maurice Lucas, a man who looked like he'd rather break your ribs than give up a layup, and the Detroit Pistons, who were literally turning basketball into a blood sport. Yet, in the middle of all these hyper-athletic, stone-cold killers, you had this tall, slow-looking white dude from a town called French Lick. It's almost a joke, right? By a guy who looks like he's running in sand. Take it from Michael Cooper. Now, if you don't know Cooper, he was the defensive specialist for the Showtime Lakers. He was long, fast, and he basically made a career out of locking down the greatest scorers in history. He was the guy Larry Bird himself called the toughest defender he ever faced. But if you ask Cooper today, he'll tell you he absolutely hated guarding Larry. He's gone on record saying Bird was a savant.
And you know what? I hate Larry Bird, but I respect the hell out of that man because I went against him in all those championships.
He talked about how the Lakers would have entire team meetings. We're talking Magic, Kareem, Pat Riley, just trying to solve the Bird problem. Cooper said the scariest part wasn't the shot. It was the fact that Bird was calculating every possible outcome in real time. You'd play him perfectly for 23 seconds, and in that final tick, he'd find a backdoor cut or a passing lane that shouldn't physically exist. But where does that kind of savant brain come from? It goes back to that Indiana dirt. Bird grew up with nothing. I mean nothing, literally. He used to wear the same clothes to school every day, and his family struggled just to keep the lights on. That's why he played with such a chip on his shoulder. It wasn't just a game, it was his way out. When he led Indiana State to that 1979 championship game, it was the definition of a Cinderella story. He took a school that nobody cared about and dragged them into the most watched college basketball game in history. Think about that. 35 million people tuned in to watch a kid from a town of 2,000. That's the kind of grit that earns you the ultimate respect from your enemies. And speaking of, remember Pat Riley? The mastermind behind the Lakers. Well, Riley has famously said this on different occasions, and I quote, "If I had to pick one person to take a shot to win a game, I'd choose Michael Jordan. But if I had to pick one person to take a shot to save my life, I'd choose Larry Bird." Yeah, that was the extent to which the Birdman was feared. But that brings up the real question: how? Like actually, how does a guy who looked like this make the most elite athletes on earth look like they were rookies? Because on paper, Bird shouldn't have been able to beat these guys. But on the court, he broke all of them. See, there was a specific, cold-blooded formula to how Bird operated, and it started with something sports psychologists call the knockout effect. The second Bird calls his shot and tells you exactly where he's going to score from. He's not just being cocky, he's planting a seed of hesitation in your brain. In the NBA, everything is instinct. But when Bird tells you, "I'm going to stand right here, and I'm going to hit it right in your face," he forces you to stop playing basketball and start playing a mental game you can't win. Once you start wondering, is he actually going to do it? Boom, he's already gone. But let's get into the actual mechanics. Bird had this thing I call the 3-inch rule. Most guys need to blow past you to be effective. But Bird only needed 3 inches of space. He was a master of the step-back deception decades before it was a league-wide highlight staple. He actually learned the move from a bench-warmer teammate named Terry Duerod, but Bird turned it into a weapon of mass destruction. Since he wasn't going to outrun you, he used subtle footwork to manipulate your balance. He'd give you a shoulder shiver or a head fake that would make you lean just a 1/4 inch the wrong way. The second your weight shifted to your heels, he'd step back, and the ball was already gone. He wasn't playing against your speed, he was playing against your center of gravity. And then there was the bait and punish system. Most stars hate being double-teamed. They get frustrated and force shots. But Bird actually wanted you to double-team him. He'd post up in a spot that looked vulnerable just to lure a second defender in. But the second that man stepped off his teammate, Bird's passing vision turned into a lethal weapon. He had the entire court mapped out in his head like a GPS. But here's the thing that really messed with the league's ego. It's one thing to get dismantled by a genius. It's another thing to have to deal with the massive cultural baggage the media shoved down everyone's throat. They called him the Great White Hope. It was this branding that suggested Bird was only successful because the league wanted a white star, and this created a toxic level of resentment. Think about being a player like Isaiah Thomas or a rookie Dennis Rodman. You're out there giving your life to the game, and you see this guy who doesn't look like an athlete getting all the hype, especially knowing deep down he was living up to it. So after the 1987 playoffs, Rodman snapped. He told the media Bird was way overrated, and that he only won MVPs because he was white. Even years after, he doubled down and said that if Bird played in this modern era, he wouldn't survive.
Larry Bird played in this era, I think he'd be in Europe.
But the saddest part of this story is that Bird's obsession with being the tough country boy is exactly what ended him. In 1985, instead of hiring a crew, Bird decided to personally shovel 13 tons of gravel to build a driveway for his mom. He was a multi-millionaire, the MVP of the league, and he was out there hunching over, destroying his spine for a $20 DIY project. His doctor, Dan Dyrek, later said that was the beginning of the end, because his back had literally shifted out of alignment. By the time the 1992 Dream Team rolled around, the legend was a shell of himself. While Jordan and Magic were soaring, Bird spent most of the Olympics lying flat on the floor behind the bench because the nerve pain in his back was so bad he couldn't even sit in a chair. But as he stood on that podium in Barcelona with a gold medal around his neck, he knew the game was over. And the way he walked away, leaving the league in the hands of the man who finally figured out his formula, is the ultimate closing chapter of the 80s era. But even with a broken back and a retired jersey, Bird's legacy was still running the league. It didn't matter if you were a new superstar or a 300-pound beast like Shaquille O'Neal. You were about to find out that the Birdman wasn't just a legend, he was a blueprint. And while we're speaking of Shaq, when he first hit the league, Shaq said he thought Bird was just some lucky shooter who got hyped up by the media, until he took his time to study him.
I wasn't a fan of Larry Bird growing up because I thought everything he did was lucky. When I started, getting older and, seeing guys put in work, I realized that he is one of the greatest players ever, and it's not luck. It's all skill.
Shaq, the most physically dominant human to ever breathe, eventually had to admit that Bird was one of the greatest players in the NBA. But as the league's fear turned into this deep, unspoken respect, it led to the most iconic brotherhood in sports history. You have to realize that for 10 years, Magic and Bird were basically cold-blooded enemies. But in 1991, when the world stopped because Magic announced he had HIV, the first person who called wasn't a teammate. It was Bird.
Called me, we're talking, it's just, how you doing? I heard about it, and you can almost hear both of us with some tears in our eyes. And I'm choked up because he did call me. And,
That phone call changed everything. For the first time, they weren't Showtime and the Celtics. They were just two guys who realized they were the only ones who truly understood the weight of the crown. Magic later confessed that when the whole world was treating him like he was already gone, Bird was the only one who treated him like a human being. The final mic drop happened at Bird's jersey retirement when Magic stood there, wearing a Celtics shirt under his Lakers jacket, looked Larry in the eye, and said this.
One lie. You only told me one lie in your career.
That's pretty good.
Only one. And you only lied to the fans and all the people in the world one time. And you know what that lie was? You don't remember, do you? Larry Bird said that there would be another Larry Bird one day. And Larry, there will never, ever, ever be another Larry Bird. And so, I don't care how many people, how many players, there will never, ever be another Larry Bird. So, you take that to the bank.